mustered out after 4 full years of service on June 29, 1865, Newton was nearly 19. No drummer, he carried a rifle throughout the entire conflict. Uniforms were expensive and often scarce, said a clerk in the Federal Quartermaster's Corps. That's why our men would outfit drummer boys in whatever gear was available. Some of the sketches made by artists show boys of the 8th New York National Guard wearing uniforms from the Mexican War. With total Confederate strength somewhere near 50% of all Union forces, about 20,000 small boys, more or less, ate, slept, marched, and fought with Johnny Reb. Individual records are scarce, but it is known that Charles F. Mosby enlisted in 1861 when the Elliott Grays of the 6th Virginia Infantry went into Confederate service. After 2 years of combat experience, at age 13, Charlie was transferred to Henderson Heavy Artillery. Not all juvenile musicians were drummers. Many were buglers. Strangely though, few photographs show these young buglers, while several dozen portray their contemporaries who served as drummers. Unlike Union Army regulations stipulated that a man had to be 18 years old before he could be given a musket, but they said nothing about the age at which a fellow could bear a sword. That resulted in a remarkably large number of sword-wielding cavalrymen of 15, 16, even 13 or 14 years of age. Most boys marched, camped, and fought on land, but a few lucky ones made it to sea. Usually recruited for such duty in defiance of regulations. Young boys were priceless on warships. Black powder plus shot stored below in bulk had to be brought to magazines in powder buckets that were actually canvas bags. Twisting stairways and narrow walkways made it hard for a fully grown man to achieve any speed with a powder bucket. So the rule of thumb came to be, when it comes to powder monkeys, the smaller they are, the better they perform. Nearly every federal warship had a few powder monkeys aged 15 or under, who were selected not in spite of their small stature, but because of it.